Welcome to this review where we're going to look over the new Warcry release, Nightmare Quest. I'll give a quick overview of what's in the box, we'll go into detail with 2 warbands, and at the end I'll talk about the future, since this box is the capstone to the Gnarlwood season. This is the 4th box in the season format for Warcry. It started with the Heart of Gur, which was a full starter set, and then continued with quarterly releases of scenery, 2 warbands and a narrative campaign. So this box of Nightmare Quest does not include the core rulebook, tokens, or full decks of mission cards, although it does have a small selection. There are 6 deployment cards, 12 terrain layouts, 6 victory cards, and 6 twist cards. So although they aren't a fully fledged decks, you could use them for missions, or if you have the decks that came with the Heart of Gur, add the new cards for a little bit more variety. The terrain cards are notable as some, I think half, are just the terrain from this box, while others add terrain from other Gnarlwood boxes for some variety. The terrain from the set has 2 trees with platforms, 2 walkways, a realm shaper engine, that's that big pyramid in the middle, and some scatter terrain. You also get the board, which is a heavy card and has a different texture on each side. Warcry doesn't necessarily need a lot of terrain to make for a good game, but it is nice to have. This box has an adequate amount of terrain, but I think it was really intended to be the final part of a growing collection, which at this stage should be pretty impressive. The trees have been a constant feature throughout the season, and while they are very flavourful for Gnarlwood, I've heard multiple people advise caution when moving models, as the trees have a nasty habit of catching on clothes. I will say, I think the Realm Shaper is a little disappointing from a gameplay perspective, as you can't balance anything on the side, it's really just a big cube. If the steps of that pyramid were a little bit bigger so you could actually place models, that might have helped. To be honest though, that's only a minor gripe. I think I was hoping for more Seraphon style scenery at this point so you could build a big proper temple complex. But what we have looks good and it gets the job done. Along with the box we get the Might and Madness book. This has a lot of story info like random names and background tables. There are some narrative quests for the warbands, some special scenarios and so on. Of particular interest there is a 2-player campaign arc of 3 games called the Storm of Madness. In this, the Questor Soulsworn are looking to draw the power from the Shaper engine, while the Royal Beastflayers simply seek to destroy it. There is also a version for a larger campaign with more players split into 2 groups. I'm a big fan of these structured campaigns, especially when you can play it with the factions in the box. We have 2 warbands in this box. The Soulsworn Questors, who are a group of Stormcast heroes who've teamed up to save the day. Against them are the Royal Beastflayers, insane ghouls who think they are noble knights on a quest to slay monsters. There are 16 models in total, 6 Stormcast and 10 ghouls of varying kinds. We're going to look at the Soulsworn Questors first. One of the unique things about this warband is that everyone has the hero rune mark. They have a special rule that allows them to include fighters with the Soulsworn Questor and the hero rune marks as regular fighters. So they don't get to recruit a hero from other warbands as a fighter, but they can still use them as allies just like normal. This also means that this box offers a ton of options for other Order warbands, as any of these fighters can be used as allies. The kit differs from the ones we're used to in Warcry. Instead of fixed models, there are numerous options here. It comes with 3 base models, which you can see based on the legs and tabards. Then you have a bundle of weapon options to choose from. There are also options for arms, heads and shoulders to give some variety. We receive 2 sets of these 3 sprues. The first can be built as a Questor Prime or an Errant Questor with either Grand Axe or Grand Spear. The second can be built as a Knight Relictor or as an Errant Questor with either Grand Blade or Grand Hammer. The last one can be built as an Errant Questor Duelist with Twin Blades, or as an Errant Questor with either a Grand Hammer or a Grand Axe. I haven't personally had the chance to try this box myself, so I'm basing my review on the one from ataleofpainters.com. However, it does seem like you can mix and match the sprues. The body stances are all quite similar, and the connection points for the arms also look alike. Therefore, if we decide to build a Knight Relictor, we should be able to use the leftover Grand Blade in one of the other kits. At worst, it appears feasible with some minor conversion work. Taking an overall look at the warband, it is oddly consistent. The points range between 165 and 170, everyone has 4 movement, 20 wounds and 5 toughness, and the damage range is relatively tight, with melee damage ranging between 5 and 6.5 on average against T4. Let's start by taking a look at some of the abilities that any of the fighters in this warband can use. First is reaction, Swift Retribution. I quite like this ability. If a melee attack would kill your fighter, and that fighter still has an action to take a reaction, then you can give another friendly fighter a move or attack action. Since you can only use this ability if you are going to die, you're essentially saving one of the 2 activations you have for this turn. What's crazy about this ability is it has no target restrictions, so you can target anyone on the board. Something particularly great if you have a super scary fighter in your warband. Thundering Strikes is another interesting support action. The double lets you give another friendly fighter within 6 inches a move action. This game is all about action efficiency, and getting an action for a double is amazing. However, you need to be careful with this. Often you want to move to a target to bring your damage to bear, but your opponent will get to act next, so preferably you want to use this ability to move up to a target that has already acted. We also have the double You Won't Slow Me Down, which is an ability in the line of Blood for the Blood God. Again, this is about action efficiency. You do need to get a kill, but the fighters in the warband are all capable of dealing decent damage, and Swift Retribution and Thundering Strikes provide ways to set this up by getting the fighter beside your target. Since all of these fighters have the hero rune mark, the universal triple Inspiring Presence can be used by any of them. Unlike the others, this ability does not give you any action efficiency, but chaining 2 fighters' activations together can be incredibly effective. Among other things, it can let you deal that extra damage to a target and take it down before it has a chance to activate, which can be key. The first fighter we have is the Questor Prime, and remember, all of these fighters in this warband are heroes, so any one of them could be your leader. All the fighters are between 160 and 170, so this is one of the more expensive fighters, but that doesn't really mean much. The profile is pretty standard for a Stormcast, although arguably low for a hero. The average damage against T4 is 5.33, which is good, and it has a reach of 2, which is great. What's notable about this fighter is the triple Searing Light, which will do 3 damage to enemies within 3 inches. It shouldn't be too hard to set 2 or 3 targets up, which would give a decent amount of damage, effectively worth an extra attack. Next up we have the Soulsworn Knight Relector. It costs 165 points with all the same core stats as Questor Prime. The average damage is just slightly lower but still healthy at 5 against T4. There is also a range attack option. Interestingly, if you have to move to melee, getting 2 attacks with the range attack does slightly more damage. For comparison, the Kradron Gunnery Sergeant costs the same and does 4 damage at ranged. This is pretty healthy even if it isn't competing for a top spot. What makes this fighter really interesting is the translocation ability. Now this is a quad, and the best advice I can give you is to completely ignore quads. You cannot rely on them, and often Rampage is the best pick. That said, this is a teleport that lets you place a fighter anywhere on the battlefield as long as they are 4 inches away from all enemies. Remember, this doesn't say visible, so you can use the ability on this Soulsworn Knight Relector themselves. Moving over to the Urant Questors, we start with the Duelist with Twin Blades. This is the cheapest fighter in the warband and has a net-like AoE ability, Face Me Cowards. It's a triple that forces enemies within 3 inches to either remain where they are or come closer to the Duelist. Net effects are usually great, and this automatically works and does so with an AoE. That's pretty impressive. The downside, of course, is that the effect stops working if the Duelist is dead. So if the first locked fighter is able to get a kill, then any fighters that activate later are no longer caught. That said, this is a 5 toughness 20 wound model, so there's a lot of killing to get done. The damage here is a little higher than the previous 2, just under 6 average damage for T4, but as the strength is 4, that means it's super efficient against T3. Here we have the heavy hitters, so you've got a few different ways to build your Urant Questors. We've already seen the Duelist, and the 2 here are the 2-handed weapons with short range. So that's the Grand Hammer and the Grand Blade. I quite like these 2 options as they do present a legitimate choice. The Grand Blade does better average against T4 and under, but the Grand Hammer with a strength of 6 does better damage against T5 and T6 targets. So if you're expecting mostly T4, then the Grand Blade will be your go-to. But if you're seeing a trend towards higher toughness in your metagame, then the Grand Hammer might be a better option. Both have the Destroy rune mark, which gives them access to the double with the force of a Thunderbolt, providing a bonus attack action if you're within 1 inch of 2 or more enemies. This is definitely an incentive for the enemy to stay spread out, as getting a bonus action for a double is incredibly powerful. You can't combo this with Swift Retribution or Thundering Strikes, as the fighter who's moving would then be unable to activate because it's not during their activation. However, if you were already planning to move and you have the option to engage 2 fighters in base contact, then this ability is a great bonus. The other 2 options are the Grand Axe and the Grand Spear. The damage drops by about 1, but you do gain reach. Unfortunately, the double ability does require being within 1 inch, forcing you to choose between using the ability or staying at safe range. The spear option does cost slightly more for that range 3, and it does lose a destroy rune mark, but you probably weren't going to use it anyway. Alright, so this is the basic setup, one of each of the special characters at the top, and what I would consider the better option from that same sprue. So the Grand Sword has the highest damage warband, the Grand Hammer is similar but better against high toughness, and last we've got the Grand Axe, which I would say is slightly better than the Grand Spear due to the rune mark. If we have the opportunity to play around a little, then getting another Grand Blade would be nice. That gives us a pretty deadly melee warband. Alternatively, we can go an all-reach list. Here we have the 2 Grand Axe and 2 Grand Spears, which we should be able to put together from a single box. Everything in this list can attack from outside 1 inch, which is nice. That forces your opponent to take that extra action if they want to engage in combat. One last thing to think about is allies, and with this warband that goes both ways. Here we could take the Duelist and Grand Hammer in any other order warband, which would give the Duelist an AoE net and the Grand Hammer is there for some punch. Notably, both these fighters have access to double Thundering Strikes, allowing them to use a double to give a friendly fighter a move action. That can be great if you've got some big hunters like the Kurnoth Huntmaster or the Gurgai. Whether you're adding those big fighters to the Questor warband or taking those Questor heroes into another warband. So overall, we've got a lot of fun stuff going on. The fighters in this warband are all mid-range, which isn't the best place to be. However, the abilities are really focused on action efficiency, which is one of the most important elements of the game. I definitely think this is a competitive warband and will be a lot of fun to play. Additionally, the models look great and offer good mix and match options, so you could get 2 boxes and still keep everything looking unique. In addition, you also have the option to use these fighters as allies in other order warbands, which is a real bonus. Alright, let's head over to the Royal Beastflayers. This warband is interesting as it's arguably quite similar to the existing Flesh Eater's courts. I mean, it is just a bunch of ghouls after all. There are 9 fighters in total, the leader, the Royal Flame Master, a second, which is the Beastflayer Baron, 2 Awful Hounds, and 2 sets of 3 ghouls, the first being the Gore Squires, and the second being the Trackers. Damage is pretty broadly spread among most of the fighters in this warband, with each fighter close to the average line. Wounds are similar, although the leader may have a slightly low count for its points. Nothing stands out as particularly notable based just on the numbers. There are 2 abilities that anyone from the warband can use. The reaction deals D3 damage to a nearby target who disengages. It is directly comparable to the universal Strike Them Down, which is similar but only works 50% of the time. Trading an action for an average of 1.5 damage may not seem great, but for a cheap fighter it does provide reliable damage. However, it can be quite tricky to execute. You have to get into melee, your opponent has to take an action to disengage, and then you have to have an action available to use the reaction. It's probably not something that'll happen frequently, especially as it's often easier to simply kill cheap fighters. This ability would be more useful in narrative campaign though, where you can use Renown to trigger reactions for free. The double ability is Feed the Hounds, which can only be triggered with a kill, but it does provide an AoE heal. Since it's just a double, it's not too difficult to roll a double 6 on this, which could have a significant impact on the game. Of course, you have to kill the target, which can be tricky. Fortunately, all of your fighters have this ability, so it doesn't really matter who gets to kill in the end. Interestingly, this ability isn't locked into the warband, so if you're taking the Royal Flame Master ally into another debt warband, this ability is still effective. This is the Royal Flame Master, the leader of the warband. In many regards, this fighter is similar to the Aberrant Ghoul King, with 10 points more, slightly higher damage, and a reach of 2, which is quite nice. The Flame Master has 2 unique abilities. The first is a triple ability, Pack Tactics, which just deals straight damage. The ability is fixed and controllable. If you see an enemy with 6 wounds left, you know that you just need to get 3 fighters close to him, and his triple will kill them. Another option is a quad ability called No Rest Until Our Quest is Done. It has a 6-inch radius, which is actually a little bigger since it starts at the edge of the base. It grants everyone +2 strength, which can be a significant boost for low strength fighters. However, keep in mind that it is a quad ability, so it's not something you can rely on. Next up is the Beastflayer Baron. This damage is decent but not great. With moving to 5, the Baron is fast like the other ghouls. The Brute rune mark gives it access to the double ability, Sound the Hunt, which is quite significant. In the worst case, you roll a double 1, and you can then move 1 fighter 1 inch. In the best case scenario, you roll a double 6. You can then move 3 fighters 6 inches each. That's massive. Since it's just a double, getting high numbers is possible, and getting 2 of them isn't crazy. Get one of these in a box, but you're not limited to that. Triggering 2 high doubles with this ability could give you an insane amount of action value. The Beastflayer Baron is definitely a star of this warband. Now, let's briefly go back to the cheapest model in the warband, the Ghoul Tracker, which has the exact same stats as the Crypt Ghoul from the Flesh Eater's Courts. This is a cheap, fast fighter that you can get in bulk. The average of 2 damage versus T4 isn't amazing, but it does all add up. The Ghoul Gore Squire is a step up from that. It costs 40 points more, which is nearly double the price, but you get 4 more health, 1 more toughness, and 1.33 more damage. Are we better off with 2 Ghoul Trackers instead? Maybe. However, there is an ability for the Ghoul Gore Squire called Unleash the Hounds. We've seen this kind of ability before. The Orcs have it with Wah, and the Cities of Sigmar have it with Swift as the Wind. It's good. Keep in mind that it is a triple, so you can only expect to use it once per turn. Next up we have the Awful Hounds. They cost 130 points, which is over double the cost of a basic ghoul. The damage is exactly double of that of the ghoul, and they have slightly more wounds at 18. The big advantage of these hounds is their movement of 7. Unfortunately, due to the Beast rune mark, they can't carry treasure or open doors. However, they do have access to a double ability called Clambering Horrors, which allows them to ignore vertical distances when climbing. Depending on the battlefield, this could be cool, but honestly I'd probably keep the double for something else. The fighter is quite similar in many ways to the Fellbat Thrall, as they are both fast and cost 130 points. The bat loses a dice in damage and 6 wounds, but gains fly and 3 more movement. More crucially, the Death Thralls don't have the Beast rune mark, so they don't suffer from the limitations that brings. And that's it. The box totals up to 1,000 points. It includes 1 Flame Master, 1 Baron, 2 Hounds, 3 Gore Squires, and 3 Trackers. There are no real options, although you can build the ghouls with weapons or unarmed. If you wanted to play around with this, we have to take the Flame Master as he's the only leader option. The Baron abilities are good, and I'd be tempted to try out 2 of them. I've added an Askurgan Exemplar here, but really anything big and nasty works well, if we round it out with the Ghoul Trackers. This totals up to 11 fighters in total, all of them fast, and with those 2 Barons we can get them even faster. Now we might drop a Baron and a few ghouls to open up room for another big fighter. Although I've dropped them here, the Hounds and the Gore Squires do have a place depending on what you need. Right now I am super excited about the Baron's ability, but if that doesn't work out, we know the Gore Squire's ability has been tried and tested with many successful warbands. So what do we have? Well, this warband is similar to the Flesh Eater Courts in that it has a ton of ghouls. The Beastflayers have a few more variations, but the key part here is having the Ghoul Trackers, which have always been the backbone of Flesh Eater Courts. The Barons are fantastic, and the bonus move for a double is just great. It's a shame there's only one in the box, but it's the sort of thing that we could easily kit back from another ghoul. Similarly, the Trackers and the Gore Squires, while unique skulls themselves, are still ghouls, so you could get away with a little mix and match with normal ghouls, as long as it's clear to your opponent. I do think you want to add something scary to the mix. Death doesn't have a great list of big damage heroes, but there are vampires, aberrants, and infernals that should get the job done. Overall, this box looks like a pretty good capstone to the Gnarlwood season. I think I was hoping for a little bit more with the scenery, especially as we've just had the Seraphon release. But this Realm Shaker engine is still cool. Maybe I'll just add another 2 Realm Shaker engines from the Age of Sigmar line to get that kind of temple complex look I was hoping for. As a 2-player set, the warbands do look good, and should mix well with their respective Grand Alliances. As I mentioned earlier, this doesn't have any of the tokens, etc., but if we look over the upcoming roadmap, this was the spring release, and we're 99% sure that the summer release of that starter set is going to be the Stormcast of Zandire's Truthseekers versus the Crimson Court Vampires. Since those are Bladeborn fighters, they fit perfectly in with the warbands from the Nightmare Quest box, adding some extra options. So Nightmare Quest is actually a great place to start if you're interested in Warcry. Assemble and paint the models, and by the time you've done that, you will be able to pick up the starter set. We're not really sure what's going on with the roadmap after that. I'd kind of hoped we'd be moving into a new season with a different theme, maybe some city terrain. But it looks like GW might have pulled back from the whole season idea, which is a shame in some ways. Kill Team followed the same approach, and getting the scenery over and over and over again has not been great. We just saw Ashes of Fate for Kill Team, which essentially has 2 teams facing off against each other in a box with no scenery. So maybe that's what we're going to see for Kill Team. At worst, this could be reboxes of the Underworld models as small Warcry teams, but it could potentially be oversized warbands with big narrative campaigns included. Personally, I'm quite excited about the possibility that all these Order Warbands might be connected to the upcoming Cities of Sigmar release, which is due in autumn for Age of Sigmar. Thanks for making it all the way to the end. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Each week I put up a new video talking about one of Games Workshop's specialist games. The goal is always to try and make the best possible two-player experience. If this is something you'd find interesting, please subscribe to the channel and comment to let me know what you'd like to see in future.